Good morning, everybody. Excellent. I know you're awake because I've never actually sat in a room of this many people. I've never done yoga before, just putting that out there. And I could hear you. Could you hear all the breathing? Wasn't it great? Really enjoyed that. It's a great pleasure to have been asked to convene this session, which I have to admit feels a bit like the beginning of a joke. So I'm just putting that out there and moving on. I bring apologies from Julia, our rabbi, who sadly has norovirus, so isn't here. We met Paul in the green room and have inveigled him into this session. So we are particularly grateful for your presence, Paul. Thank you. We also have Ruby and Bishop Helen-Ann. And what I'm going to ask each of you to do is just introduce yourselves very briefly with your name, your faith or spirituality, how you're connected with farming, i.e. why you are here, and your favourite food. Ruby.
My name's Ruby Radwan, and I have a 45-acre farm on the edge of Oxford near Kidlington. It was my faith that brought me to it, the whole idea of balance, getting out of the city. I had 4 children, so I wanted balance in every part of my life, and food is an important part as well. So it's looking at realizing that our food wasn't quite what I thought it was, and deciding to take responsibility and sort of do it all myself, with my husband, of course. And favorite food. So I've liked all sorts of sweet things, I suppose, but now we're growing our own food, and I've always aspired to eat seasonally. I have to admit, beetroots are seasonal, and they are so very sweet. So at the moment, that's my favorite food.
And your faith, which faith?
Muslim.
Muslim, thank you. Bishop Helen-Ann.
Good morning, everybody. So my name's Helen-Ann Hartley, and I'm the Bishop of Ripon, which is in the Diocese of Leeds. And I have oversight of the northern part of the diocese, which basically includes all of the Yorkshire Dales National Park and the surround. So in my daily life and ministry, I encounter farming and rural communities, the length and breadth of that particular part of the country in North Yorkshire. So I'm a Christian and represent the Church of England, Anglicanism, but I became a bishop, not in the Church of England, but in New Zealand. And that's an important part of my story, which I'll say a little bit more about when we get to the next bit. My favourite food is scrambled egg. We have lots of farm shops near where we live in Ripon, and there's one in particular just outside Boroughbridge, Minskip, and Ben and Emma there have the most fantastic farm shop, and you can see the hens, buy the eggs, and they make the most amazing scrambled eggs. So that's kind of my desert island food.
Thank you. Paul.
Paul Fox, roped in at the last minute.
And very welcome.
Chips, definitely. I'd say I'm on a spiritual journey, which is not bound by a particular religious perspective, although I come from the Christian tradition. I live in Ely, and I attend a lot of Christian services, and I find a lot of comfort in that faith. But I'm also interested in lots of other faiths. And I think what yoga does is offer an opportunity to get into a place where you can investigate whatever faith or whatever spiritual journey you would like to explore, and really helps with that. And if people ask me what I'm doing, I say I do a lot of meditation, which is better than sitting around doing nothing.
In the interest of full disclosure, I am an Anglican priest, so I am Christian, but I also run the Arthur Rank Centre, which is a Christian charity, but it's ecumenical. So I get regular injections from Methodists, URC, Roman Catholic, etc., Pentecostal, and all sorts. So I bring an ecumenical perspective. Favourite food? I thought really hard about this. I thought of the question and forgot to think of the answer. Steak. rare. And the next thing I wanted to ask for each of you really is, what role does food play in your faith? And I don't mind who starts.
I'll start, okay. Well, as I said, I became a bishop in New Zealand, and one of the things that all bishops are given when you become a bishop is a shepherd's crook, a crozier. So it's kind of hardwired into my ministry that I have this role of oversight with a kind of flock, quite a diverse flock. But because I became a bishop in New Zealand, somebody rather tongue-in-cheek also decided to give me a purple, so an Episcopal-coloured cattle prod.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I'm very worried now.
So if you come to our house in Ripon, you will see, as you open the door, 2 croziers, because I have 2 wooden croziers, and the purple cattle prod, which is actually really useful for taking your wellies off. That's a top tip. Sort of slop it on down the welly and it comes off. Anyway, there you go. Who knew? But when I became a bishop in New Zealand, so I became the Bishop of Waikato, and if you know the New Zealand agricultural scene, you will know that the Waikato region is very much a dairy farming part of the country. And quite early on, I sought to have a meeting with some executives from Fonterra, which is the New Zealand dairy conglomerate. And when I met with them, one of their first questions was basically, why are you here talking to us? And so my answer to them was, well, surely you know that it was an Anglican missionary, Samuel Marsden, in 1814, who took the first dairy herd, so a herd of shorthorns, or Durhams as they were called, a gift from the governor of New South Wales to New Zealand, Christmas Day 1814, the first point of contact with the Maori, the indigenous people. And once I'd kind of said, well, you know, if it wasn't for us Anglicans, we wouldn't be here having this conversation. And they kind of, oh, right, interesting. Okay, let's talk. That says something about history in terms of food and farming and Christianity, in terms of the narrative of history, the points of contact between story and innovation. So if you look throughout Christian history, you will see, for example, in the monastic tradition, a lot of agricultural innovation happening with the monks. Near where we live, Fountains Abbey, the monastic community there were quite innovative when it came to agricultural technology. So there's something in the narrative of Christianity that involves its history of engagement and innovation. Christianity, of course, comes from Judaism, and the interesting thing there is that ancient Israel was a farming, agricultural society. So Christianity evolves out of that and takes a lot of those points of contact in the Jewish year around harvest, what became, of course, Easter, Pentecost, key parts in the year where food intersects with fasting and feasting. And a very important part of that was a deep sense of thankfulness and gratitude to God for provision, both in hard and challenging times and in good times. So that sort of sense of narrative, right from Genesis, where working the land has got a bit of a mixed blessing because it's kind of a curse because Adam takes a piece of fruit from Eve, right through to Revelation, where the heavenly banquet is a lamb, albeit it's a GM lamb because it seems to have 7 horns and 7 eyes, which is slightly troubling. But you get this lots of rich imagery of food and a sense of connection deeply ingrained in the Christian tradition with food production and working the land and using your hands.
Thank you. Would you say that some of that is true for the Muslim faith as well?
Yes, plenty of it actually, because the Muslim faith follows with the Abrahamic tradition. So all the stories about Abraham, Jesus, and all the biblical prophets, all the stories are mentioned again in the Quran as well, with the addition of introducing the Prophet Muhammad. And he was also a shepherd. So this connection with farming and food and feasting, as you mentioned, is an essential part of the Muslim faith. And there are many, many literal images and metaphors about farming. So balance is very much brought into the whole farming and food thing. So there's a lot of images about God bringing rain. So you can have alfalfa. Alfalfa is mentioned in the Quran. So the idea of gardens and food. And how this is all about balance. This really underpins the whole idea of farming and food and gardens, it's all about balance. And this concept is really strong throughout the whole of the Quran. And again, it starts with the Bible and the Old Testament as well, because the continuation. And although we don't have specific foods like the blood of Christ or anything like that, like bread and wine, which is very symbolic, we don't have symbolic foods, but we do have a very strong tradition of feasting and fasting. So people may have heard of Ramadan, which is a month of fasting, and we just talk about Ramadan, that 1 month, but actually the tradition of the Prophet Muhammad was he fasted 2 days every week. So I think people often say it's like Monday and a Thursday, I could be wrong. But anyway, the idea is two days every week. And it's not a 24-hour fast, but it can be depending where you are and how strong you feel, if you're able to do it. Because fasting is for those who are able to do it, it's not across the board. And it literally is fasting. It's no food, no water. So it's strict fasting, and it's a real cleansing process. And of course, it makes you aware of all the sorts of things, not just biologically going on in yourself, but it affects your mind, calms you down, and makes you realize what it really is to be hungry. And then at the end of Ramadan, or at the end of your fast, you do feast. And actually, if you've done a whole month of Ramadan, you really can't feast because your stomach's shrunk and you just can't eat like that anymore. It doesn't take more than a couple of days, though, to get back to normal. But it's really strange. If you've done it for that long, it's like, oh, I can't drink water. Oh, yes, I can drink water. Oh, no, it isn't Ramadan. So you're going back, yeah, I can do this now. So you do get into a habit quite quickly. Because you'll find Muslims all over the world, you know, American, Chinese, whatever. Food is so varied. There is such a variety of food. And everyone has a traditional cultural food during those periods.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that idea that your spirituality impacts what and when you eat, which then affects your body. Paul, is there anything in yoga about food and how it affects body and mind?
There's a lot, actually. I would pick up on your comment about balance. There's a famous yoga posture. You might have seen Mo Salah do it when he scored a goal last season, because all professional footballers are doing yoga. And so he's celebrating tree pose. In the studio where I teach my classes, there's a big whiteboard. So when we were doing tree pose, I drew the pose, but instead of this position, the hands were like this, and there was a big piece of cake in this hand and a glass of wine in this hand, which just to show that it helps with balance if you have both. And also that life is about finding an individualized balance, and that, I think, translates quite well into the yogic approach to food, which is all about mindful eating. Because if you take the time to really think about what you're taking in and to both enjoy the food, but also think about why you're eating, you can get out of a lot of habits which are contributing greatly to the obesity crisis. And food can be a sort of crutch for unhappiness, that people will reach for food and use it in that way. So the yoga tradition, there is some fasting in there as well, but it really goes into this idea, if you are very mindful about what you eat, and there's a tradition of also eating in silence or eating with very calm conversation, so that you have time to savor and enjoy, so you're not just rushing food. And then you can really appreciate the nutritional value and hopefully make better choices about what food you eat. So it changes your relationship to the food, it changes your relationship to yourself, and by creating space and awareness around that's part of the spiritual journey.
Yeah, thank you. That brings to mind for me partially the way that you would eat in a monastery, which would be normally in silence or listening to a reading. But on the other hand, I know at the Arthur Rank Centre, for example, we see food as a very communal activity. We stop for a cake and biscuits and coffee at 11 every day. Do come and join us, but let us know if you all show up at once. And so there is almost a tension there between how you are as you eat. I wanted to move us on, if I may, to think about how our faith affects our views on food production and on welfare values. May I start with you there, please, Ruby?
So there's some very fundamental ideas in the Quran about food production, really interestingly. One of the things is the whole image of the garden. So this metaphor, if you like, is one of balance and beauty and perfection. And then we're separated. So the idea is separated from the Garden of Eden, if you like. Yes. And we find ourselves on earth. Now, there isn't balance here, but there's a potential for balance. And then there's also the idea of what in Arabic is mizan. It means scale, so balance. Again, the image of the mizan, that we are here to keep the balance. So the earth must be kept in balance. So again, we have this image right through. And then the responsibility of mankind. So it's not really descending onto earth. The idea of being expelled from the garden isn't a concept that we have in the Quran. That is very different, I think, from the traditional Abrahamic view. So there's no expulsion. It's much more, that was what's meant to happen anyway. So there isn't a negativity here, it's more a responsibility. So coming onto the planet isn't a negative thing for humankind, it's a positive thing, it's an opportunity. And the word used for humans is khalifa, which means, you may have heard words like caliphate or whatever, but khalifa just means steward. So a steward isn't someone who sort of possesses and manipulates and does what he likes, but one who has to take care of and protect, and then leave as it was found. So this is the idea, you leave the earth as you find it, ideally better, you know, if you can, not what we've done so far. So this idea of the scales balance, is the idea of stewardship and the idea of being disconnected from this spiritual perfection, which was the garden. These are really, really strong fundamental ideas in the Quran, and they run right through it. So then you have to, well, what are we going to do? And the idea is, the point is we've got to be responsible now, and we've got to keep this balance. And there is a bit in the Quran, actually, now I won't say in Arabic because I can't remember it, but in the English, it's quite prophetic. It says, so in the English translation, it says corruption or pollution. So fasid means corruption or pollution, has appeared on the land and seas as a result of man's own actions, in order they might taste that which their actions have caused, and in order that they might turn back. Now, this is a direct translation of the verse in the Quran, and I wonder when it was first revealed 700 years ago, what the desert nomads in Mecca made of that. For me, it's obvious. For me, I see it in the seas, and I see it in the air, and I see it in the land around me. So it's like, did someone just say that today? And I can't believe that a verse like that was revealed such a long time ago. So it's a reminder to me and to Muslims that actually, if you're really following a faith and you're going to choose this faith, this is really important. You've really got to put the balance back, because actually you caused it and you are responsible, and you've got to put it back. And just to finish, one more thing, there is a saying of the Prophet Muhammad that even if you know tomorrow is going to be the end of the earth, that's it, it's the last day, what do you do? And the advice is, even if you have a seed in your hand and you know tomorrow is the end, you still plant it. So this idea of it doesn't matter about the result. What matters is what you do. It's your responsibility, it's your personal responsibility, and your actions and your interactions with the community that are really, really important. And that's what faith is for me.
Thank you. Bishop Helen-Ann.
It was a 19th century German critic of Christianity who said in another context, coined the phrase, which translated is, you are what you eat. And of course, human at its heart has the word hummus, which is nothing to do with chickpeas and olive oil, but it has to do with ground or earthiness. So that sense of balance and perspective that comes from our very core being, I think is an important part of that aspect of Christianity, which comes from Jesus in the Gospels, where he says, I came that you might have life, and life in all its fullness. And for me, that reminds me very much of a phrase I was taught by the indigenous people in New Zealand, the Maori tu, Maori ora, the fully lived life begets life. So in a sense, if I'm flourishing, then I want my neighbour to flourish too. And I think that's an important underpinning part of a Christian perspective, which means that issues around stewardship, welfare, well-being of earth, of animals, but also of the individual. So that's a real motivating factor for me in my role, paying particular attention to issues around mental well-being and mental health. I'm a trustee of the Farming Community Network, which is a Christian charity in its origins, and that says something about what it's trying to do in terms of reaching out to people who may be challenging. So I think that underpins something of the values aspect that motivates people of Christian faith and certainly motivates me daily in my role.
Paul, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
You probably all got me down as a long-haired, sandal-wearing, lentil-munching vegetarian weirdo anyway. Two out of three ain't bad. What I would say is that for me, food choices are very much around climate crisis and things like that, which I haven't attended sessions and I don't know your views about it in detail, but I would have thought that tendency to wanting to buy British food that hasn't travelled a long way, to buy local food and support local farmers, these are the things that I try to do in my own personal choices, and run a mile from anything that's been air freighted in from Africa. I don't want to eat French beans grown in Morocco in December. So getting back to more seasonal foods and being in that connection and rhythm of the world and of life, I think is the important insight for me.
We've touched on, well, you've brought us nicely actually onto issues of sustainability of climate change. We have heard a lot at this conference, and rightly so, about climate change and the way that farmers can impact that by their actions. Are there things that our faiths can offer into that notion that we need to change? And I know that Christianity would perhaps be not always seen as the most cutting edge faith. Notoriously, small congregations don't like change. Notoriously, if I may say so, farmers perhaps don't like change. We share a human fear, I think, of change. But are there things that our faith can offer into that?
Yeah, so, okay, so something my faith says to me, and this is again a Quran quote, God changes nothing in a people's condition until they change that which is in their souls. So this is very important to me, and it did really motivate my whole farming. We used to call it an adventure, which became a nightmare because my husband and I are not from farming background. We're from London and we always live in cities, and I often tell my kids that I only had a cat. That was the only animal I had when I was younger. And my husband's doing his research in Egypt in a tiny village, and I went in, with my arrogance, coming from a very developed country to a very poor country, and a tiny village where half of them didn't even have electricity. And I had a girl, I say, who helped me work out how to buy things and how to navigate myself around this village. And I said, I wanted chicken for dinner. So she said, okay, well, we'll do it on Tuesday. I couldn't understand why we had to wait till Tuesday, but we waited till Tuesday because that's when the market came. So there was no supermarkets. And she took me to the local market, and she asked me to choose a pet. It was a live bird. And I just thought, well, what is she thinking? I don't want a pet. I want to eat chicken, that nice frozen stuff you get, all dead. And it took me such a long time to realize that she was the wise woman, and I was the totally ignorant person from a country where we have everything processed and removed from reality. So then I had to take this live animal home to decide who was going to kill it. I didn't know how you killed a chicken, and the whole plucking and drawing the whole farming thing that farmers do. I totally had no idea. And in the end, I only just wanted the breast. Didn't want any other bits of the chicken as well. So it was such a steep learning curve. But it made me realize over the years that I don't live in a real situation. I live in a very artificial society that we've created. And it did really start a desire to take responsibility, again, back to this boring thing, responsibility, and get back to nature. So we sold everything we had and we started this farm, and we tried to do it in really good principles. And I think it was as a state of it, we started to realize, the condition of farming, the condition of the environment, and that really motivated us to have a very sustainable farm and a diverse farm. So diversity is really, really essential. Monoculture is very, very dangerous for many different reasons, which I'm not going to go into academic reasons. I think most people know why. Consumption patterns, waste, all these stuffs impinged very much on our decisions and do increasingly. So on the farm, we've tried really hard to not just highlight and criticize what everyone else is criticizing, what climate change is showing us and what people are demonstrating about outside. We realize in a way we can't change that, but we can in ourselves on our little 45-acre land. So when we got the opportunity to build a house, it's a mud house. It's made of cob, and we've used as many local things as possible and as many local people as possible. The meat we produce is sold directly to the customers or in the local farmers market, and I was part of starting the local organic farmers market about 17 years ago in Oxford. We planted about 4,000 trees, natural woodlands. When we decided about our heating, we decided to use solid fuel. So we're planting the trees, and as we manage the woodland, we're using that as our heating and our hot water, which means at times when no one's filled the boiler, so we're cold. And I wish sometimes I'd just go and switch a button and be warm, but I can't. And we all have to chop wood, and it's very difficult. But the sense of taking responsibility and feeling, wouldn't it be great if everyone could do this, if people had the opportunity to have a little farm and to do just what they can, just a tiny, tiny change would make a massive difference that I don't think any government policy could really have the same effect. If we all just stopped eating chicken for a week, we could stop the industrialized manipulation, and the use of antibiotics on chicken. It would only take a week of everyone stopping, but yeah, so the power's in our hands and the change is us. We are the change.
Yes. Whether we should all stop eating chicken, I think, is perhaps a dangerous statement to be making in this room.
Yeah.
But there is a lot to be said for understanding the connection between the food we eat and the processes that go to produce that food. I, too, often buy my chicken from a supermarket, and it comes in a beautiful shrink-wrapped plastic cover, which puts me in the normal end of the population. And I'm quite lucky because I do know how to kill a chicken, although I'm a bit rusty on drawing them. Helen-Ann, what would you be saying about change?
I'm conscious of time.
Oh, are we? Oh, heavens.
Yeah, but I think
I hadn't noticed. Sorry, Matt. Where's he gone?
just very briefly, change and transformation are all around us. And what I value most from some of the connections I have with farming community is farmers' capacity to adapt and deal with very challenging issues.
Yes.
And I choose to use my voice in the public square to speak up on behalf of many of those challenges. So I'm grateful, and I'm changed because of that.
Thank you. Anything you'd like to add to that?
Just briefly, I think we are in the middle of a climate crisis, climate emergency, and everybody just has to do what they can. And the yoga perspective would be, in a holistic world, that people have to take responsibility and do what they can. But I'm not going to lecture people, especially farmers, on what they should do. But I'm sure you're all going to do what you can, and the things you can do.
I'd like to thank all of our speakers this morning who have stepped into a fairly unscripted conversation. I hope that you've enjoyed it and found it useful. We will, I think, mostly be around later on. If you want to continue conversations with us, please do. But thank you very much indeed for the opportunity to do this.